maybe I'll share this document too. So I figure this meeting is probably more of it's probably going to be more of a beginning than an end, but we'll see how far we get. But I thought I would like us to talk a little bit about our plans over the next year or so, little more than a year. If we are going to do a 2021 kind of edition, we have to start thinking about and timing the stuff that we do. And what it means to do an edition is also like something we can talk a little bit about. But I think there's some combination of just using that as a good time goal for ourselves to do work that we think would make Rust better and target existing problems, even if it's not really like doesn't have anything to do with backwards incompatibility per se. And then there's also the question of if there are going to be any backwards incompatible changes that would span an edition boundary, then we want to prioritize those because we want to make sure that goes smoothly. So let's see. To start, I can say that I put a little work into just collecting information, both in terms of unfinished business or our kind of 2020 goals. One of the big ones was to clarify and work through unfinished business, things that are mostly done but not quite, and see what it takes to really knock them off, right? So we enumerated some of the things here. There's probably more. And then down here, I don't know if these aren't all me probably, but I think some of these are other people, but me and others added things that were like potentially breaking changes that we might want to think about or prepare for. Actually, I realized at least one is missing. So what we could do is look through that list. Let me just add in this. Let's see, where is it? I don't know, whatever. I'll come to it later. We could talk a little also about like top level goals, like what we think it is most important to try and achieve. But I sort of figure that'll probably come out as we're going a little bit too, and be a bit more natural if we address it that way. That all sound reasonable so far? Okay.
Sounds reasonable.
So I guess to start, we can look a little bit at the ergonomics or other things that are left over that fall under the unfinished business. I guess what I'm hoping we can come out of this from is a kind of shorter list, reasonably short list of things we might think about doing, and then we can try to decide if that's actually schedulable and how we would do that.
Yeah. Among other things, it might be a good idea to take the temperature of the room on these, and our highest priorities would be the ones where everybody's like, yeah, we absolutely need to do that. We just have to sort out the bike shedding or sort out the, some particular problem, as opposed to half of us think we shouldn't do something and it would be much more difficult to pull off.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going down some lists, I guess we'll go down the order that they're here. One of the things that's on my mind is infiltrate. We have some amount of infiltrate support stabilized, some amount implemented and not stabilized, and some amount, there's a few other details that I think we would want to resolve with some of the implementations that we've done. I think it'd be pretty great. This seems like one of the key things I think we should work to expand personally. And I'm potentially interested in helping to get involved in that. But the reason that I think it's great is not only, is infiltrate super useful, but it's really useful for async IO. It's kind of getting better infiltrate support is kind of a key step for a number of patterns and like async function and traits and so forth. I think our support that we have is pretty good, but it has some problems. In particular, I think I have to go review the details, but the way we do the inference of types and the way we said we would do the inference of types doesn't quite line up, and that seems like something we would want to review in detail and think about with what we actually want.
Last I heard, the idea of infiltrate in a trait was something where there was some amount of additional logic required for inference. Is this in the category of stuff that will be easy when we have chalk, or is this in the category of we have no idea how to do this and we need to come up with logic for it?
Infiltrate in a trait is different, but I was referring to infiltrate in an impl, which actually works today.
I remember listing infiltrate in trait in here somewhere as well. It seems to have gone walkabout.
You're right. That is worth adding to the list. The complication there, I think it would I guess I think the work here would be to sort of, somebody would want to do the background work of like, let's write up all the places. Something I wanted to do at some point and didn't get around to is to make an example, like an example program that shows all the places that infiltrate can be used with little links or something that can help you learn about what it means in that context and why and so forth, and what the controversies are, and we could decide what subset we want to shoot for. Infiltrate in traits was somewhat controversial because it has a link to associated types. Go on, Bose.
No, I was just waiting.
There was a connection between it and generics, right? Or GATs.
Yeah, there's some sort of design work needing to be done around exactly how, like when it can be substituted with a real type and stuff like that.
Right.
And there's also, I mean, it would, in order for it to have the same semantics in return position as it does outside of traits, it would need to be generic. Yeah, exactly, a generic associated type as you put the note. So that's a sort of implementation work that's blocking this that Josh is probably referring to.
Yeah, and that work I think is progressing, and I think there's definitely like overlaps, but we can project that work will get done. But I think
yeah. Also, like that's exact same work that blocks async methods. So getting that work done would be really impactful.
Let's move on from this one then. So, is anyone like opposed to the idea of pushing further on infiltrate?
It seems pretty clear that the answer is what can we do, not what should we do.
Actually, I had there's something that's smaller with infiltrate that I noticed that I was surprised at how we had resolved, but we hadn't, which is turbofish in functions that have infiltrate in argument position.
Yeah.
That currently turbofish is just not allowed because we didn't know whether we wanted you to, be able to and required to specify the infiltrate as an argument. I think just deciding on that, my inclination would be to make infiltrate not be specifiable, like through turbofish syntax.
You mean use the current behavior, but decide that it's permanent rather than we're not sure yet?
Well, there's actually, let's see. There's one case where it's currently not. I don't have the paper open, sorry, or I would be typing it. But if you have a function that has a type parameter and an infiltrate, you can't specify the type parameter because we don't allow turbofish because that would be, it would involve deciding whether or not you can specify the infiltrate. So I have like, for example, generic functions that then have but then I use impl fn because the function type is, never specifiable because it's a closure, which you don't know the name of. And so I would like to be able to, write, use turbofish to specify t if necessary or if it's helpful, but right now you can't.
That seems reasonable. So instead of banning turbofish on any function that has an infiltrate in argument position, go ahead and allow it and declare that we will never allow you to specify the infiltrate argument, but you can specify things that are generic arguments.
Yeah, exactly. So we just decided this is the difference between infiltrate and generics, is that infiltrate, you can never use turbofish to specify them.
Yeah, that was on my list of smaller details to work out, but I incline the same way as you, but
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the only downside, which I don't think is a blocker, I think it's just worth stating aloud, is if we do that, that means you can't ever switch from a generic argument to argument position infiltrate without that being a breaking API change. That said, that doesn't seem like a horribly big deal.
Yeah, it's true. It's currently would be also because of the way it affects turbofish.
It's already true today, and it would only have worked in certain cases before.
Yeah, because the order would then have to stay the same, which would mean that only if the arguments are specified in the same order the infiltrate is used would be used, which is like, a niche kind of conversion.
It's reasonably common, but yes, I agree. I don't think it's worth preserving that. And I think we're keeping generic syntax. We're not suggesting one or the other is better. So,
yeah, and I actually like in this example, this is what I like to use infiltrate for, is for things like closures where you never want to turbofish the type. It just doesn't really make sense. And like then you can have the generics be the things that you might actually want to turbofish, right? Like these are the types that.
It's also true that you could imagine, like, it's not that the door is forever closed. It's just that if we did permit it, they would somehow not be, they would be optional.
Yeah, exactly. It'd have to be,
we could have implicit syntax like argument 3's unnamed type is. For that matter, it would not be hard to do that in a macro instead of turbofish if somebody ever wanted to. You can just declare a temporary in advance and then pass it to the function.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think the implications of trying to figure out what the order of the infiltrates are, and I mean, we can do a left to right inside out or something if we really wanted to, but that feels so bleh that I kind of like just saying, no, if you want to specify it, make it a real generic.
Yeah, so it sounds like our path forward on this one would be to post an issue, do FCP, and we could all check boxes to say, is this what we agree with doing?
Yeah, I think there's just like a meta issue of someone having to like do some roundup and identify those things and push them in some order, but yeah.
Right. I meant specifically the turbofish item was one that we could peel off and do.
Yeah, let's move on though, because it's 17 minutes in and we have a lot.
Yeah.
So these two, implicit mod submodule and create visibility, Josh put them on there. Do you want to say anything about it, Josh?
Sure. So these were the two big things that we kicked out of the Rust 2018 module system because they were bits that we didn't either have clear agreement on or a clear path forward on in one case. Create visibility is kind of the easier one where leaving aside potential human readability ambiguity, there was a parser ambiguity that we would have had to decide a way to resolve. So on that one, it seems worth asking, do we still want this? How do we want to resolve this? And is the addition a good time to do it?
I think one thing I'll note is that we kind of already made that decision. Like, in some sense, that decision is made for us, although we could alter it because that's legal syntax today and it has a meaning, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. The issue would be there are 2 or 3 ways we talked about potentially resolving this, including linting on this one particular case and requiring you to specify it unambiguously, or picking one or the other meaning, or for that matter, taking into account whether you write crate : or crate space : which I'm not happy about, but we talked about it as a possibility. There are ways we could fix this, and the question is more, do we care enough to move forward with this?
I personally would find this a very nice to have. It's just relatively small, but I miss it every time. It's the first thing that when I convert from nightly to stable, I have to go change. I would be inclined to just pick. I think we've pretty successfully gotten rid of leading : paths, and I'd be inclined to pick a meaning, but
Yeah.
I don't really care to debate the details of the ambiguity at this moment.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think that I think probably the thing that I would want to pursue would be like just linting if you have a space in the crate path in this kind of context or something, where to tell you that you know, it doesn't mean what you thought it meant.
Right pub crate, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. Or parens around the path or something, whatever the solution is, the disambiguation is. Yeah. But I mean, that's like, yeah, no one is writing. Like I don't think I've written a colon path outside of like macros that I'm trying to make sure they're extra compatible.
Right.
So, yeah.
We could gather a little research on that. What about implicit mod submodules? Those were much more controversial, I think.
So yeah, this one, it's not that we didn't know how to do it. It's that there was a lot of controversy around the idea of doing so, because many people in the community posted around the notion of, hey, I have a .rs file sitting around in my project. I didn't anchor it into the module hierarchy with a mod statement, and that was intentional. It's a test program. It's some local copy I made, whatever. It's a reasonable concern. It does change people's current workflow. And the question would then be, do we perhaps want to switch the default and let you opt out of it? Do we want to have a lint that says you forgot to write mod submodule and let you turn that lint off? There are many things we could do here to remove the why isn't it finding my code problem.
The scanning of network mounted file systems, though, is going to be a little hard to work around, right? That's an expense that you're going to pay for a lint, for example.
Yes. There's not much you can do about that.
I think.
Well, actually, I thought we were saying. I remember now that another alternative here would be that we. Oh no, we didn't want that. Never mind. There was the option of only using files that sort of are mentioned in your code somewhere, which I was concerned about because at least I often have like modules with just impls in them that never get explicitly mentioned in a sense, but are code and would require some sort of mod or like an artificial use, which might be, but it was sort of
the presence of use statements would cause these things to come into being, essentially.
Yeah, you could imagine that, right? And that would fit with our newer parser architecture that lazily loads files.
Right. We could do that, or we could just in advance go scan for all the .rs files in your directory and that aren't part of some other workspace and mount them effectively.
The thing is that having like the use statements drive a lint, I'd be sort of more okay with, because that's like still something where you're looking at the code, and that's still the root of things. But just scanning the file system, it comes back to that question of the people who are dealing with network file systems are gonna complain about just, raw scanning of things.
This is true.
I mean,
that is actually a good intermediate point here. There was one, so we don't fully know the architecture we want for this. One proposal was to automatically find all the files and pretend you'd put mod statements for all of them. Another one was that you could use in place of mod, and you could, for example, use submodule, and this wouldn't be fully redundant if you didn't already have a mod submodule. That would then remove the need to write mod unless you're doing an inline module, which might be appealing. Presumably, you could also use A::B, and that would also pull in A if it didn't already exist.
So for some reason, my computer is not wanting to charge, and I don't know why that is, which is why I'm waving around and being strange. But I want to throw in this thought, which is I'm not convinced this is worth the effort of resolving compared to the problems that are in front of us.
I think, well, I think I would like if this was Rust. I didn't have to write mod statements somehow. I was always in favor of this, but I think I feel like I know that it will be extremely controversial, and I feel also there's a certain cost of making big changes to the path system again. Like, I feel like we shot our shot and we made the revised path system, and we really can't do that again.
We could think about a lint. I think a lint could be a plausible, like to address the actual confusion, which I still get from time to time, of I have a file and
and a lint thing.
But the lint wouldn't need to be put to the
like,
edition, right? The lint would not need to be. The lint would not need to be put to the edition, though. Yeah.
No, not at all. Yeah.
And the idea would be if you have a network-mounted file system, you make it allow or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, it's no problem not running.
I would also be in favor of, as we experiment with that lint, we could also look at what would it take to auto-load modules mentioned in a use statement rather than everywhere in the program, and whether that would be a substantial usability improvement. But this sounds like the answer is, let's add a lint and start experimenting rather than committing to do something now.
Yeah, especially since it's not edition tied.
Yeah.
Definitely fits with my current personal goal of trying to do more with less.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to ask if Josh or somebody else can pick up leading the meeting while I try to figure out how to keep my computer from running out of battery.
Okay, I'd be happy to drive from here. All right, so moving on to the next items. There is a proposal still open, I believe, to have generalized type description available everywhere. The main advantage being that you could write as less and colon more. I would certainly love to have this. I think the main blocker was just, can the parser support this and will this introduce any ambiguities?
That's not, so I want to know about the as thing, because I think that as normally isn't used in that way. Like, as is normally changing a type to a different type, and those types normally don't coerce between each other, or if they did, they wouldn't be. But I mean, I think for me, the big issue with this was always that it conflicts with keyword arguments, like named function arguments.
I see. So effectively, if we used colon syntax for ascription, then we couldn't use colon syntax for named arguments in some potential future syntax change?
Yeah, exactly.
So just for the sake of completeness, I would observe it conflicts with colon syntax for keyword arguments. If we wanted to have, say, equal sign syntax for keyword arguments, it would not conflict.
Unfortunately, that also isn't possible because that's an assignment.
Yeah, it's a totally different conflict then.
There's already a conflict with that.
I forgot that is technically legal syntax.
Yeah, it evaluates the unit.
We had an RFC about making that not legal syntax that we could bring back if we wanted.
That's something we could do on an addition boundary. If I don't know that I would want to do that right now, but maybe. At least deprecating this pretty plausible.
Yeah, that seems kind of actually. I mean, it's separate from type description, but it's like a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah, I don't know about type description, about like whether we're going to do keyword arguments in the future, but I would regardless be in favor of just linting hard against keyword argument, against X equals Y syntax in an expression context where it returns empty tuple.
Yeah, I think that I could see it possibly that macros are generating this would be the only concern.
The one place that I remember that came up last time we talked about this was match arms, where if it becomes not an expression, it needs braces, and people were sad about that. I think we might be able to just allow that, but...
Yeah, we could probably make that specific case work.
I wouldn't necessarily make it not an expression.
Oh yeah, it just specifically would parse, like this would be a parse error in the argument position because we're reserving it to instead like resolve the ambiguity to keywords if we ever had keywords.
I would also suggest the possibility, as long as we're banning it in specific contexts, can we also ban A equals B in struct or enum or similar initializer context, where you
Probably just do a survey of the
use it in
grammar.
positional, but it looks like you're doing positional, you're doing named initializer syntax?
Yeah, I think a survey of the grammar would be appropriate here to look at the
Yeah.
expression, you know, the expression
You mean
positions
this,
that.
Josh?
Something like that, yes.
Well, anyway, let's keep going, but I think this is worth investigating as a thing we can try to migrate people away from.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that one, then we can consider an addition change to parse differently. Let's go on to the next one. Implied bounds. I think this is one where Nico might want to chime in on the status.
Yeah, so the work on integrating chalk into Rust is progressing. That was kind of the blocker here, is in some the way we sort of wound up implementing and thinking about this was easily modeled in chalk. The controversies, there are some amount of controversies there, but the things that we didn't fully resolve was around Semver and, you know, the implications of if you remove bounds from struct definitions, it's now an API breaking change, at least if we do it across crates. I kind of think we should just hold off. We don't have to talk much about it, but I'd be curious to know if anyone's super against this proposal, or at least some variant of it. I do think it would be a real usability win, at least some variant of it, especially by that I mean, like, it might even be as limited as either within the same crate where foo is defined, or even in the same module or submodule or something, that you can just write, you know, just write this and get the bounds that you wanted.
Would this also extend to functions that require a bound because a trait that they are asking for in one of their arguments requires the bound?
I don't know exactly what you mean, but do you need something like this?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that was the original plan, yeah.
Okay.
Basically.
I don't know about the impl block case, but I've run into the function case numerous times where I find myself repeating a block of 3 different trait bounds that are required for a type anytime I want to mention the type and take an argument of the type.
Yeah, that's the symptom we're taking aim at.
Yeah, I certainly see people hitting this and complaining about it all the time, and having to tell them, no, move your bound to the impl and take it off the struct is fine, but not what they want to hear.
Right.
It was mainly just rules around making sure that, like, around like private fields or something, having bounds, not inheriting those and things like that, right, Nico? That was what we had to figure out.
There are some rules.
No, I think
private, but that's different, I think, unless you're.
My favorite example of what you wanted to be careful about on this one was we took the copy bound off of cell. We couldn't have done that with this.
Yeah, it would make it illegal to remove bounds.
Yeah. And that was I think that cell change was a very good one. So I'm a little afraid of this, although the library does this almost nowhere.
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah, so I think there would be 2 options. We could start it, create local. We could, in the future, you could imagine, I don't know, you know, something declaring
Yeah.
but it's starting to get a little.
This might be a little difficult, but is there any way that we could not require you to specify a bound if the only reason you need it is to provide a type to that trait that's completely generic, and do require you to specify a bound if you use it yourself? So if you care that it's copy, you have to say it's copy. If you only know that foo cares that it's copy, then you can just use foo, and foo's requirements will carry through.
I like something like that for a like, I'm not using the fact that T is hash, but I'm using a hash set or something. That if I want to
think we
call
could
hash,
do
I need
that.
to say that it is there or something.
I'd have to think about how, but I think we could do that.
Right. We might need a broad definition of I'm relying on, which would include things like I'm passing the T in question as a separate argument. That that would also mean you're effectively exposing that in your API.
Yeah, this might be complicated.
Nah, but it's worth thinking about.
Anyway.
The other thing that I don't know what the progress is on, but might help is if we have trait aliases, this might become less painful.
Yeah.
Somewhat. It's a workaround more so than the most natural syntax, but it certainly would be less painful, yes.
So let's move on from this too, because time.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, it's not really. I think nobody is opposed to the concept. We just want to tinker. It's not tied to the addition per se because it's sort of a forward compatible thing.
True.
So it's mostly like, let's let the implementation proceed and then we'll explore the options. I think that these kind of ideas, these more subtle rules, I think this is exactly why I'd want to get the talk work done first, because I think we could definitely do that by tinkering the way we set up the logic, but it would be relatively easy to change at that point.
Okay. So,
trait aliases,
you
by
want
the
to
way,
add anything about trait aliases, Nico?
I just added it because Scott mentioned it and I'd forgotten about it, but they're like sort of implemented, I think. They're implemented, but maybe there's maybe there might be some bugs. There was some concerns that I don't think I ever really understood around something. I don't remember what the concerns were. I still think this is probably a pretty small and relatively, for certain people, relatively high impact change for making things ergonomic. So I want to go check on all the examples and make sure that they work.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one up is Rust 2018 idiom length. Scott already pointed out one possibility could be to go ahead and make it a hard requirement to write dyn and prohibit bare traits objects. Are there any other Rust 2018 things that we had as an idiom lent that we might wish to start either turning on by default or enforcing?
I don't remember what the whole set is, but I definitely think we should start bumping these up.
Yeah, we had planned to do those, to turn these up even in 2018, but
I think we should put them to warn like now, or at least we should look at them and we decide which ones to put to warn now.
Right. I think dyn is already warn now, which means if we wanted to put it to hard error, we could.
I don't feel that. I mean, it seems like it's working fine. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
let's just start warning now on some of them, and
sure.
There have been a couple of user threads of like, why do I have to write dyn because it works without it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I wouldn't be opposed to making it a hard error, but I'd like to start the warning now.
That was sort of the original long-term plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So why don't we, I mean, this exactly fits in we should be starting to do warnings, or at least having the mechanisms to do warnings by October, so.
Yeah, I think we do need to review the list, but assuming there's nothing wildly controversial, I like the idea that we move all of the allow by default that were not yet moved to warn by default up to warn by default. Okay.
Yep.
Next one up is specialization. There has been a lot of iteration on this lately, including the whole soundness issue that came up. There's now a new min specialization variant that the standard library is trying to stay within the subset of. So I think the only question would be, is there something that is likely to help addition-wise here of moving forward where it would be harder without an addition?
There's not any backwards incompatible aspects to it, but I don't remember exactly what min specialization did. I think the main bit of design work left here was around like if we want to have, I'm trying to remember now, if you want to be able to specialize on traits that, like for all t that implement some trait, then we need, that doesn't really work that well in the min specialization variant, and it's a pretty common thing to want to do. And we need,
It does seem like the most common kind of specialization, well, the second most common after I want to specialize for this one specific concrete type.
Right, but I think that there would be value in trying to move forward with just that former case, which is pretty useful too. But there was like a certain amount of design work remaining there where we wanted to have basically about, if you read like Aaron's blog post, it was kind of, there would be some sort of, I don't remember what notation we were using, but some way to say, I'm going to implement for all t foo for t where, and you have like, it's not that it implements debug, it's that it implements debug in a specialization compatible way or something. We had a different term for that. But it's not backwards incompatible. It just needs someone to think about it, write it up, and make it seem natural.
Is there any degree to which we need a keyword here that we don't already have?
Yeah, that's a good point. You might want a keyword. What could make it backwards incompatible would be if I've had thoughts of actually changing the default so that like by default, all impulse are compatible and you have to opt out to write an impl that is not specialization compatible. But I think that is just too big. We can't do that in one step. That would have to be something we plan for the future. Like we first need to make an opt-in system that works. And
there is
there, but if we did, it would be separate.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one then. It sounds like this is not heavily tied to the addition, except perhaps if we need a keyword. Or if we want to make an incremental step towards that plan that you just described.
I think that's right. The only thing is, in terms of the bigger questions, which I guess we'll leave off the question of like what to prioritize, but I'd like to think, where does this fall compared to like infiltrate and so on? Right. My view is somewhat less, but
right.
Important.
Okay, the next one up is, I don't know that this is tied to the addition. It's more that a lot of people have asked for it and wanted it, and I want to think about whether there's a way the addition could help or provide a milestone. Syntax for if let some refutable binding or otherwise do something that exits the function. I have wanted this many, many, many times, and many other people have as well. There have been a lot of proposed syntaxes for it, and
a tracking issue or some other issue where it's been filed and the discussion has been.
I think there's a tracking issue. I didn't find it.
There's a bunch of IRLO threads. I don't know about anything other than that.
Right.
So bad.
That's a good point.
I do wonder.
There was originally, I think, a proposal for if not let, and it just became very confusing that if not would then bind something outside of the if block. There were also discussions about a guard syntax, which would be very heavyweight and more keywordy. And then I think the last variant that we looked at was effectively an if that was part of a let binding assignment. There was a minor syntactic ambiguity, but it was one of those that only came up if you were otherwise going to bind something to unit.
No, it's just a try let, huh?
I don't know. I remember, is this Petroshenkov had a proposal? Is that his first one?
No, none of the links that I put in there.
I do think this is pretty annoying.
Yeah,
I wonder how many of these
the
are.
byte shedding of syntax is what has blocked this.
I wonder how much like question mark actually can cover these cases, and if maybe there's
that too.
question mark that can.
Oh, you mean like
most of the time it is not about binding result here. It is
But
usually,
it's
or
binding
even
option normally is my.
that's what I was gonna say. It's also not usually about binding option. It does sometimes happen, but it's also things like if this is the case of this enum that my function is designed to handle, then pull it out of the enum.
Yeah.
otherwise?
I think it's usually not question mark because a lot of the situations I saw are or, and question mark is an and.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Sure. If you think of at that try block, conceptually basically an and because they both have to have the value.
Yeah.
A lot of these are like, if it doesn't have the value, I want to do something in the
Well, that's
sort
not
of
if
or
let or
sense.
exit, no? Because exit would be, because it exits if there's no. It's a
Usual proposal is something
Yeah,
like,
the exit is often a continue though, which is hard to put in question mark. Maybe there's a way. Something like,
this was like the original proposal, right? Let X something else.
Yeah, I was just pulling that up. There is an RFC 1303 that got postponed quite some time ago for let else. And
Yeah.
I think the only ambiguity there would ever come up if you were actually writing if on the right side of a let and without an else, such that then the expression would be binding to the unit that returned.
That's an addition thing we could do.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think somebody actually either ran this through Crater or at least somehow checked parsing and found that this literally never came up in the entire body of extant Rust code that we're aware of. And I'm not surprised.
It's hard to imagine, but yeah. You have to work, it has to be like this because the thing would have to have unit type.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And even
then, we could probably resolve that ambiguity at the parser level.
Where is even the ambiguity? No, I'm sure that's there, but my example isn't enough. There has to be a surrounding if or something. But
yeah, I would love to have let refutable equals expression else work.
I feel like this is the natural.
Yeah, I think so too.
This feels like the natural syntax.
Yeah, this is, I mean, we looked at like 10 different syntaxes, and this, I think, was the one everybody seemed happiest with.
it did have some complaints about, oh, but what if I need multiple blocks here or something, but because it loses the U, but whatever.
I think if you need multiple blocks case was, I think the multiple blocks case was the one where we said, okay, at that point you need to start writing a match or writing separate functions or indenting or similar.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to solve all
There's
problems.
the thread.
To solve a really useful problem.
Right. I do feel like match is there for when you need.
So here's a related question. Does anybody feel like they would be up for actually concretely implementing this, or at the very least reopening the refutable let else proposal? Because last I saw it was closed as postponed.
It also ties in, I just want to add with some of the work that's happened lately around slices and OR patterns and arms and so on. Like there's a kind of theme of more matching, more powerful matching.
I found a better link to IRLO because that has a list of a bunch of the options that people had come up with and some links to some of those conversations.
Actually, that's a good point. This does tie to OR patterns for binding in that technically you could write let variant 1 of X or variant 2 of X equals foo else.
Right. I was assuming that would work. I think I don't know that I want to volunteer, but let's worry about the who will do what a little bit later. But I think an interesting thing for us to do, if we, probably not directly out of this meeting, but following up, would be if we had a list of stuff and we kind of said, here's some stuff we'd like to do. This is what we sort of have people for. This is what we're looking for, someone who's motivated. Like we have a liaison, but we don't have a person to, we don't have a lead, you know.
Meine Damen und Herren.
Sorry?
No, that was a background video, sorry.
Separate, okay. But we'll come back to that, I guess.
Okay. So quickly going through some
time check.
Yeah.
We're 50 minutes in. I think we're not going to get to new or other items. That's okay.
Sure. So quickly going through other candidates here. Anybody want to speak up about either in-band lifetime bindings or private and public length?
So I want in-band bindings, but I think private and public links is. I actually haven't hit this lately. I don't know if what we did, I kind of forgot, but it seems like for a while it was super annoying. And it seems kind of like a no-brainer to me to finish the job, but maybe we already did. We were basically trying to roll back a lot of those links so that they, instead of, they error it out more when you actually use things than at the declaration site, as I recall. But I feel like I haven't been hitting these errors as much lately, but I'm not sure why that is.
Or is either of these one that would make sense to discuss in this meeting for prioritization, or should we see if we can get through one or two of the high priority new or other items?
What's this guy? I think. Oh yeah.
Oh,
the do this.
Lifetime, eliding lifetimes and associated types.
I'd be in favor of that. Forgot all about that, Arson. God, you should self-advocate more. I guess we can. I don't know. I don't feel like necessarily fighting the in-band lifetimes fight, although I still think it's a real annoying thing. I'm not 100% sure it was the right solution also.
Does that one maybe need discussion of its own at a design meeting at some point, if you're interested, Nico?
Maybe, I'd be inclined to move on at this moment. I don't know if I would feel differently.
So I'm gonna quickly skip around a little bit in new or other items because there's a couple that I think are worth discussing from an addition point of view. One of them is unsafe in unsafe function, where if we're going to make a backwards incompatible change here, an addition would be part of that step. I don't know that we can do this in one step, but for example, if we wanted to start lightly warning about this, then an addition might be the place to do it so that in a distant future, we have the opportunity to change the default.
Right.
Yeah, that seemed like the plan we'd been talking about.
Yep. The only caveat here would be to what extent is this going to be controversial and really painful for people? Like, will this turn into the, oh, okay, of Rust 2021, 95% of the porting work I have to do involves my pile of unsafe functions?
I would hope that we would, I mean, I think we would try to automate this, right?
Rust fix?
Yeah.
So then the main question is, how good can we do? Like, we can do a real, I would not want to warn, even though it's not like a hard error, I would prefer to have a Rust fix.
Sure.
And I think the question would be, how narrow can we make the unsafe blocks? Kind of implementation question. Like the most sort of bad version would just make the whole function body unsafe.
Right.
I think we can do better, but you know, that's.
That's
putting
that's a quality of implementation question, yes.
But putting every expression that's unsafe inside its own unsafe block also doesn't seem like a very good.
Right. There's a question of taste here.
Like,
that's definitely a common style, right? But,
there's also, by the way, one slight interaction with another thing we've discussed. If we decide to introduce a function equals expression syntax, then that would reduce the number of braces here if you do equals unsafe open brace. That said, I'm not going to try to push that syntax at this moment, and I don't think we can talk about it in 5 minutes. I'm only observing there's an interaction here.
yeah. I think we should try to get someone to, well, first let's get the thing implemented, and then let's talk about the idea of bumping it up. That's relatively lower priority because I think, like, the idea was that we would do some of those Rust fix work next year. Like, that would be
right. Right. The Rust fix can come later if we're confident we can do it. The question is then, do we make the change by October as a thing that the new edition implies? Okay. Skipping ahead a little bit to a couple other items. Amaniu, do you want to talk very briefly about why we might want a new keyword for ASM and contrast that with the idea of ASM being a scope macro?
Where is that?
Amaniu is still on? Oh, Amaniu is not still on. Never mind. Then one item, now that we are starting to coalesce around consensus for try-blocks, then I think the next step on that is that it would be really nice to have the syntax for early return with error. I've been joking with a couple people on Twitter that syntax examples can just use the yeet keyword because we know that's definitely not what we're doing, so we can be neutral about what syntax we're using. But more in all seriousness, whatever keyword we actually use for this, we might want to reserve for the edition if we haven't already.
Yeah.
We talked about the possibilities of throw, of fail, of error, and it would be nice to settle on something, reserve a keyword, and make this possible without having to do more painful syntax in past editions.
So last edition, we had an RFC for this and ended up closing even the reservation of it because we said we wouldn't do that.
That's why
do we have anything different here? Do we need a plan, a more thorough plan for what it would actually be before we do that?
So that was the proposal here. Yes, the last time around, we decided we didn't want to just proactively reserve a keyword for a feature that doesn't exist yet. So the implication here would be if somehow between now and October, we can complete our bike shedding and decide on a keyword, then we could reserve the keyword and implement the keyword in the next edition. Because frankly, this is an incredibly small change with the sole exception of we have to sort out the try trait or similar in order to decide its exact desugaring. But the compiler implementation, other than the nature of what we desugar it to, is fairly straightforward.
Yeah, definitely.
It's already, like, the question mark already contains the desugaring, yeah, so, like.
Right, I agree with the sentiment of, if we're going to do this, let's do it. Let's not just reserve space to do it.
Right. That's actually a good point, Boats. We could just declare that the desugaring here is return error of E, oh, sorry, return, no, right. Question mark contains it, but you still have to have the E, the error of E.
Yeah, I mean, the desugaring, the implementation is trivial. It's just, right.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, it's, if the, like, try trait changes, it already has to account for the fact that unstable, you can already perform this operation.
I don't think it's connected to the try trait. It's just a matter of.
Yeah.
I think it is slightly because.
Yeah,
I think it is slightly because we won't have to figure out what we're bounding on things, but yeah.
Right. We could have this literally be return error of E, or rather error of E question mark, but that would imply the use of error as opposed to some other specific type like try from error.
So I have another call I have to join now. I think we do have an upcoming meeting where we have time to talk about this. I guess we should discuss it then. What would be good in the meantime, people can skim this doc and maybe leave comments and we can have some discussion in there and we'll figure out how to follow up and go further with this planning. Because I think this has felt pretty good. I think we need to do this again. Maybe even next week. I forget what we had planned to talk about. Type. Anyway, all right. I have to run. See you all later.
Okay. Bye.